Okay, let's take a look at what we're going to do for our server error page. And if we go back to our interceptor, just for a reminder about what we're doing here when we do get a 500 error, then we're routing to the server error page, but we're also passing through some navigation extras. And effectively, we're storing the error in state for our route, which we can access using this thing called navigation extras. And let's see how we can access that in our server error component. So this is the one time where we'll definitely need to create a constructor in our component class. So I'm going to create a property for the error and just give it a type of any, and we'll create a constructor because this is the only place where we can access the navigation extras. So since we're creating a constructor, I'm going to use constructor injection for the router. So I'm going to say private router and open the curly brackets. And then, like I say, this is the only place where we can access this navigation extras inside here. So I'm going to say const navigation equals, and we'll say list.router. And we've got a function available in here called getCurrentNavigation. And this returns the current navigation object when the router is navigating and null when idle. So we'll get hold of this and we'll say list.error is equal to navigation.extras.states. And then in square brackets, we'll try and access the error property. And this navigation extras also needs to be optional, and also so does the state. Everything here needs to be optional because it could be undefined. But now we've got the error potentially stored in this error property, so we can use this inside our server error component templates. Let's open that one up. And we'll add some HTML inside here. So I'll add an h4 tag and just say internal server error as the heading for this page. And then we'll check to see if we actually have the error. So I'm just going to use the built-in control, fully conditional, or built-in control flow, and I'll create the if statement and we'll check to see if we actually have the error. And if we do, then I'll create an h5 tag and give it a class of text-danger and say error and colon, and then we'll use interpolation and say error.message. Below the h5, I'll just add a paragraph tag with a class equal to font-weight-bold and say notes. If you are seeing this error, then Angular is not to blame for this. Because server errors are our API's problem, and if you're seeing this error in your Angular component, then it doesn't really matter what kind of Angular code fixes you make, you're not going to make any headway into solving the problem, because it's a server error, which means it's not a client-side error and there's nothing you can do in Angular to fix this error. So we'll add some general advice of what to do next. I'll say what to do next. You're now faced with a server-side error. So what do you do next? Well, let's just add a few steps of some generic advice for what you can do when faced with this kind of error. So we'll add an ordered list and add a list item, and we'll just say open Chrome Dev Tools and check the network request or the failing network request, because you will have a network request that's got an error, and I'll say in the network tab, and then we'll add another list item and just say examine the URL of the failing request. And then the third list item is reproduce the error in Postman. If you can reproduce the error, then Angular is not to blame for this error. It's a server-side error and there's nothing you can do in Angular that's going to change that. And I have seen questions in the past where students have spent far too long troubleshooting Angular for a server-side error, and the only way you can resolve these is by fixing the problem on the server. Following this, we'll just add a paragraph and give it a class of font-weight bold and say following is the stack trace, and check the first 2 lines. This tells you exactly which line of code caused the problem! Exclamation mark. And do please follow this advice. It's probably something you already know, but just in case, I'll include it anyway. And then we'll just add a code tag, and we'll give this a class of mt-5, and we'll give it a style, and say background color, and say white smoke. And inside this code area, we'll just put inside the error.details, as this is going to be the stack trace. And typically in the first 2 lines of the stack trace, that's where the useful information is contained. So let's check our progress now. Let's go back to our browser, and we can already see what we get from this, but let's pretend we didn't see that, and we'll start again. So we'll click on errors, and we'll click on test 500 error, and now we can see the results. A bad thing has happened. And what to do next? Open Chrome DevTools, and we do that by going to inspect, and I won't demonstrate that all over again, but examine the URL of the failing request and reproduce the error in Postman, and we get the stack trace and check the first 2 lines. This tells us exactly what line of code caused the problem, and sure enough, within the first 2 lines we can see that this was caused by the API controller's buggy controller on line 31. So now we have our server error page as well. Marvelous. And what we've achieved there, I know it's painful to deal with error handling. We're not building an app for errors, of course, but what we have done is really centralize things on our API and our client side as well. And that means we don't really need to worry about error handling for each function or method or class we create, because we've got error handlers for our HTTP requests on the client side that are going to be intercepted, and we've also got that functionality to handle exceptions on the server side centrally. So we don't need to fill up our code with try-catch blocks. We can rely on those error handlers to take care of that for us. So this brings us to the end of this section. So let's go back to VS Code, and I'm just going to close all of these down, and we'll go to our source control tab, and we can stage our changes, and I'm going to say end of section 7 and commit the changes and sync them up with GitHub, and we'll wrap this up with a summary.